thank you everyone for joining this morning's discussion, where we'll be looking at instructional design, but more particularly at how we go about operationalizing the ADDIE model into a useful workflow or process for design. I'd like to start off with definitions. So what do we mean by instructional design? It's a common misrepresentation that instructional design refers to the tasks or the role of a specific instructional designer, whereas instructional design actually refers to a process or a system in which we design, develop, and implement learning objectives, activities, and assessment. So the term actually refers to the overall process, and in a lot of instances it'll include a projects team that works in collaboration to put it together, whether it's an online or blended learning module or program. In terms of an instructional design model which is suitable and fit for purpose and the topic for this morning, I'd like to look at the ADDIE model. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the term, ADDIE stands for Analysis, Design, Development, Implementation, and Evaluation. Now, the most common criticism of the ADDIE model is that evaluation doesn't come until the end. So after you've implemented your program or your learning resources and made them available to students. However, best practice practitioners will always include some element of quality assurance, user testing, review, and evaluation within the design and development process itself. So operationally, we can actually get around that objective. Now what you're seeing on screen is a workflow. So a really suitable, fit for purpose process when we go about operationalizing the ADDIE model. Just before I get into each of the key components, I'd just like to flag that each stage has its own unique project-related documentation that you follow throughout the process. And there are also extensive communications planning and procedures in place just to help the team stay on track throughout the project lifecycle. So if I start at the top left-hand side where we have project brief, this is essentially our analysis stage where we're looking at available budget, timelines, risks and mitigations, stakeholder analysis, communications planning, and syllabus. I mean, the list does actually go on, but I won't go into too much detail on this point right now, but we can schedule further discussions later on if there is interest to look at the templates and the documentation itself. But essentially what we're looking to do at this stage is assess capacity. So what are our objectives? How much time do we have? And what are the abilities within the team? So how much can we actually develop within the time frame and the budget available to us? And then that can allow us to make informed decisions about how we go throughout the rest of the project in terms of how advanced we're creating for the module, but also the tools that we select throughout. Then we move on to the design stage where we have instructional design, storyboarding, script writing. And what we're looking to produce here, not only the individual storyboards for the learning assets and the module or program, but also a directory of sorts. So a list of learning assets, which can then feed into our project timelines. Again, that goes into risk and mitigation conversations. So if we're too ambitious, and let's say, for example, we've designed a lot of, or proposed the design of a lot of learning assets, but then we don't have the expertise or the people on board to be able to deliver those, then we can tweak our plans slightly. Once we've completed our instructional design and our storyboarding, we go through to quality assurance and review. And this is when we're really sense checking our storyboards. Are there any spelling mistakes? Are there any errors in grammar? And we're really looking to make our storyboards and our script as accurate as possible, in line with delivering the key components of the material. So for example, we are working with your medicine. Are we capturing those learning objectives and those key components correctly? Once everything's been signed off and approved and we agree on our scripts and our storyboards, we then go into learning asset development, which is also referred to as the build. And this is where we start to develop our teaching and our assessment content. Now, again, it's important to be aware of the tools that we're using for this, the limitations within those tools, and any potential risks when we're using those tools, because this would then feed into our quality assurance, user testing, and review stage. Now, for me personally, best to test in the live environment, so you get the experience that the students will have. That will also allow us to pick up on anything that's potentially gone wrong. And following our first review stage, we then have our first iteration step, and then a second quality assurance, user testing review, and a second iteration step. Now, just to flag here, the purpose of these quality review and iteration steps are really to catch out anything major that may have gone wrong in terms of planning and delivery, but also to catch out any potential technical issues if something doesn't present or sit correctly on screen. The purpose is really to fix those, I'll call them minor errors that may occur during development. It's really not to change the scope of the learning asset in question. So what will often happen is a member of the team will get through to maybe the second quality assurance step, and they'll just be unhappy with the learning asset, and then they'll want to start making some major modifications. Now that's really going to slow down the process. And if you do ever find yourselves in that scenario, it's best to go back to the design stage. Just pull that asset out, go back to the design stage and discuss the storyboard and essentially what changes need to happen. It's important that the workflow that I'm showing you on screen isn't disturbed or disrupted in that way, because then of course you're going to get backlog and it'll affect your delivery dates. So once we're happy with the learning asset as is, go through to final sign-off and release of the learning asset via the VLE to students. Now, in terms of operational limitations to this way of working, it's often quite lengthy and time-consuming process. Project timelines often range between 8 to 12 months, although that can really vary depending on your objectives and what you're trying to achieve. You often find that key stakeholders will work in silo of one another. So depending on what your role is or where you sit within that process, you'll focus on that and that alone. And there's really limited collaboration between professionals within the team, which can actually be quite detrimental to the project. If you're trying to achieve the best results possible, you really want to share that knowledge between the project team. And then we often find bottlenecks in processes. So for example, if you have a single e-learning technologist on a project team and they're responsible for, let's say, tools such as Articulate Storyline, for example, they'll be the only one within that team with access to and working on a specialist design tool like that. So then you've actually created a bottleneck where everything has to go through that process, that step in the process, and it can be quite limiting in terms of achievements, especially when you're working towards tight timescales. Now, in terms of potential solutions, I've found within the NHLI, it's really about being deliberate in terms of how you allocate workloads and how you approach the design and development of your resources. And one of the successes that we've had over the previous few years is by using Microsoft Sway as a tool to deliver some of that content. So the content I'm referring to is text, images, and any audio and video that's used by making use of Microsoft Sphere, which is a tool that's available internally to all staff, we're really removing that bottleneck in the development process, where the entire project team can access that learning item or that learning resource within Sphere. Everyone can have that input. If there are any errors found in the text, for example, anyone within the team can go directly into that resource and make changes. And then what that does is it leaves the specialist tools or the specialist users to focus on developing activities and quizzes which are generally available within those design tools such as Articulate, Storyline, for example. Now, I'm not going to go into any more detail about Microsoft Sphere, but I'm really happy to speak to everyone again if there's interest to look into our approach and how we rolled out Sphere across the NHLI. And that brings us to the end of my presentation this morning. I'll just go ahead and unshare my screen for questions.
Great, so thank you for that, Zuba. Let's get straight into questions. I've got, Joanna's got a question in the chat, and then let's go to Sophie. Joanna, do you want to ask your question?
Yes. Zuba, thank you so much for your presentation. I really like how much you stick to the project. So you're a learning designer, but also a learning technologist, I think, and there's definitely a lot of project management I can see in your approach. My question is, so how do we keep all members of the team tight or in the know about the deadlines in this project? So at least some of the barriers I have had at some point is there's obviously so many nice tools that you can use to divide all the tasks and for people to know what they're doing when, but if these tools are not accessible to people with different knowledge of technology, and if it's not something that they're going to check soon, what tools do you use for this, and how do you keep everyone in the team engaged with their own tasks and their own deadlines?
So I'm what you refer to as an end-to-end developer. So that's what I've done throughout a lot of my career. So I've been involved with each individual aspect of the process and seen it throughout to conclusion. What I often find is normally an education piece. So first and foremost, making everyone aware of what our capabilities are and what's available. But as you said, without having access or prior knowledge to those design tools. So my first step is to make templates available to the project team so they can see what our capabilities are, especially when it comes to designing the more complex learning assets, such as activities. I think everyone's pretty much up to speed with multiple choice quizzes, so we don't need to cover those too much. But when it comes to developing those activities, what's needed, what we need to go into them in terms of the information in making them an effective learning asset. And I usually post those to a shared group folder. Within the NHLI, I created a Blackboard page which contains a lot of those resources. And then it's about having design meetings. I think design meetings are very important because, again, as I flagged, people tend to work within silos within their specialty. So it's very useful just to bring everyone into a room. And this may be once you've already developed a learning design plan, for example. So you've highlighted the assets that you want spread throughout your module. And then just to have a very open and honest conversation around the effectiveness of those assets and how we get there. So just to give you an example, on a previous project, I was responsible for leading on the development of the bar, the UK bar. And it was kind of the first in the history of the bar that's ever been delivered in that way. So I was working with some fantastic baristas who were turned instructional designers, but they were finding lots of weird and wonderful websites online, a lot of them in China, and saying, I really like that activity, can we do it? Now, we didn't have capacity in the project team, or we didn't have capacity to bring in specialist coders who'd be able to develop those activities. So my first challenge and task was really to set the standards in terms of these are our capabilities, these are what our design tools can do. And those design meetings were really useful in making that happen. And then throughout the project life cycle, it's just about regular communication, keeping everyone updated, but also really keeping an eye on those risks and mitigations. I find a lot of people don't look at risks in the beginning or potential risks, so then they won't have a clue when it comes to mitigating those. Whereas I'm constantly thinking of the process, the flow, what can potentially go wrong, how do we now be ready before that can happen.
Okay, that's great. So if I understand correctly, you perhaps put more effort and more emphasis in meeting regularly with the whole team, aside from having, some sort of platform somewhere that is telling people what they should be doing when.
I mean,
So
in terms of the shared platform, I find Excel is useful as a kind of project tracking tool. Okay. For everyone to keep up to the speed. But I feel those team meetings and even one-to-one conversations between myself and a key stakeholder, they're often really useful to alleviate any potential misunderstanding.
No, that's true. Thank you so much. I mean, I've used Excel many times. It's just that sometimes I look at the new tools and I go, "Ooh, shiny. Should I use that one instead?"
Yeah, they're shiny. I mean, we have tools like Trello, we have Monday. Exactly. However, you quite often have to make your project team and the needs of your project team fit within the construct of that project management tool, whereas they quite often don't cover the needs of the project team. So Monday, for example, to see the detail of each milestone, you have to click on the box to then pull up the detail of that key milestone. Mm-hmm. Whereas in a lot of instances, you just want to have one screen, one view, so you can keep track of the whole, rather than having to click in and out each time. It's very time consuming, and it blocks your ability to assess what's going on. So I find Excel often cuts through all of that.
Just don't have any drift. Otherwise, you're going to be doing some cutting and pasting in Excel, aren't you? some severe cutting and pasting. Great stuff. Over to you, Sophie.
So it was more of a comment than a question. So when I was listening to your presentation, and it's something that you just you gave an example of the interaction with the academics or the expert content experts. Yeah. It just struck me, and it's something that seems pretty obvious when you think about it, but it struck me because I started thinking about it. It's around the point you made on the flexibility at every single point that you have to allow to adapt the project based on time and resources. And when you say it like that, of course it's obvious, but on the other hand, when coming from a background of non-designer and I don't know in what content, but expert in something, so bringing that aspect and how you interact with academics in our environment, mm-hmm. and also to make we often think about one way, often based on our experience on campus, of how we deliver or how we teach a certain concept. And I think it's maybe a lot of the success is also to try to provide that flexibility right from the start, to say, okay, you can do it this way, which is how you imagine doing it. And that's where really your expertise comes in. But then you can also do it this way, and that will cost you 26 less days to make. And this is really more efficient for this. And so I think to have that aspect coming in at every single step of your process was quite interesting to actually start thinking. We often come in with one idea. It's like working with an architect on a house. You think about that wonderful extension, and then they come in and they say, well, that's going to cost you $1 million. And that's much cheaper, and that's not going to be insulated enough, and that will be. So it's really about working together, and having that flexibility to adapt and say not possible or yes possible. So it was more of a comment, but it's nice to see that and to bring that out when discussing with academic might be quite important. Yeah, I think.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, Sophie. And I totally agree. I think what you'll often find with a lot of learning designers, they'll be quite precious about the design tools that they want to use. And of course, it's because that's their profession and it's how they enjoy to work. But I think when you come into an environment like Imperial College, you're often working against very tight timelines, first and foremost. And again, you're also working with people who are professionals and the best in the world within their own right. But then the question is, how do we now approach them in the right way? And not being too demanding on their time as well, and giving them what they need. And what I found as part of the digital transformation project when I joined the NHLI is Microsoft Sphere was really instrumental in allowing us the time that we needed, removing the bottlenecks, and really giving these experts within their own field some ability to be hands-on with the material that was then going to be kind of presented to students. And I think they really enjoyed that as well, because they wanted to be hands-on. This is their content, this is their life's work, and it gave them a sense of ownership rather than I'm handing this over to a stranger that I don't know who works in online delivery. It was really involving them a lot more within the process.
And it removes a lot of back and forth. So when
Yeah,
you do the co-creation, you don't go back and then there was a mistake and then you need to meet. I mean, it's a lot of back and forth at the moment.
Yeah.
Just on the timeline, I thought on your slide that 8 to 12 was weeks, not months. So it was quite. It made me giggle, and I thought, 8 to 12, and then I thought maybe he didn't put the unit to not scare anyone. But okay.
It depends, but I'll be completely transparent with you. My first project when I joined the college, I had 4 weeks to deliver 3 online blended modules. And that's really when Microsoft Sphere came into it. It wouldn't have been possible. Between the months June to December, I led on the development of 250 individual mini lectures within Microsoft Sphere. Now, if you just put that into context, you're looking at that's a couple of years of work if we're going to use any of the normal approaches or design tools. So when I conducted my needs analysis, when I joined the college, that was the first thing that really jumped out to me. We're working with people with time poor. We're not going to have much time to deliver. How do we work around that? How do we work a lot more collaboratively? And that's what I was able to achieve.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you.
Fantastic. We've any other questions, folks? I don't want to hog the questions. Okay, just a thing on there. I was thinking earlier on about activities or sessions where actually the purpose of the session is to have students generating something and discussing it with each other, and it got me thinking, hang on a minute, is the ADDIE model, does it really lend itself to the production line and the production of learning objects and artifacts as opposed to pure learning experiences where you don't actually know what's going to come out? I just wonder what you thought about that, Zuba.
So it's more, so I'd say your design meetings are really where you're having your conversations around what's the learning experience, what do we want to achieve? And then of course you can build on that, so we can implement forums, we can use tools such as OneNote, for example, or Padlet to get that online collaborative working going between the students and to capture that. The ADDIE model lends itself more to achieving that end goal, which is that module filled with asynchronous learning objects. So really that's where the ADDIE model comes into it. But of course within that, within your design meetings, you can branch the process off in which way you'd like to.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say was just on a point that Sophie brought up was about how long it takes to make a module. There's a piece of string going on here, isn't there? Yeah. There really is, and you really need to have those initial design meetings to work out what is this beast that we're dealing with, and make a best guess based on that, as opposed to applying the same model from module or program to program.
Yeah, I mean, we can say roughly how long it'll take to develop a single learning asset or to record a video or post-production on that video. It's not until you've got your learning asset list, which again, I do normally use Excel for, and then you can do your calculations in time. But again, we're all individuals, and we all work at our own pace. So that has to be accounted for as well. So if we're working with busy academic colleagues, who again are quite time poor, it really depends on how quickly they can come through as well. So that really needs to be taken into account. And as you said, how big is this beast that we're working on, and how much time, how much kind of time can we realistically invest? And if we don't have enough time, can we bring in some more people? So it tends to be people, time, and money, doesn't it? And if you're short on one, you need a bit more of the other.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant.